One of the first oil wells in North America was drilled in 1859 about 15 kilometers southeast of Moncton, on the east side of the Petitcodiac River near the village of Dover. In 1899, the New Brunswick Petroleum Company was granted a 5-year lease on 46,000 square kilometers of land called Lease 115. From 1903 to 1905, the company put down 77 shallow wells in the Dover-St. Joseph area. Some of the wells produced a few barrels of oil. The best well had an initial flow of 50 barrels per day. It is estimated that about 3,000 barrels of oil were taken during this period. The Memramcook wells were not very deep, so it is likely that these tripod derricks were all that was used. Active drilling is not taking place, but the boiler house can be seen on the right. This warehouse and boiler is supplying steam to the drilling equipment for the wells around it. The growing demand for oil found investors willing to gamble even in the face of limited success. These early Memramcook photos were supplied by Moncton collector Norman Cormier. This nitroglycerin factory, built about 1903 on the east side of the river, was used to manufacture and store nitroglycerin. When oil production from a well slowed, it could be restarted by dropping an explosive to the bottom and igniting it. The chemical was transported very carefully in containers by horse and wagon to Stony Creek. In 1908, Dr. James Alexander Leo Henderson of England purchased Lease 115 and formed Maritime Oilfields. In July 1909, Henderson's company discovered a ready supply of natural gas in a well drilled in Stony Creek. Attention quickly shifted to the Albert County side of the river. Renovations on this house in Stony Creek were completed in November 1909. It became company headquarters and boarding house for employees requiring lodging. Many of the experienced oilfield workers from the east side of the river took up similar positions in Stony Creek. Fire swept the oil hill early, leaving a scorched landscape. Horse and steam power would usher in a new energy source that would change our world forever. This photo and many others were donated to the Albert County Museum in 1951. I suspect many of them were taken by Dr. Henderson. Moncton's business elite welcomes American investors at the ICR station. Local company directors included former mayors A.C. Chapman and F.W. Sumner, Messrs. R.C. Tate of Shediac, banker Fulton McDougall, and lawyer E.R. MacDonald. There are 10 cars poised for the trip to Stony Creek, including Buick, Chalmers, Ford, Pierce Arrow, and EMF. This must have been quite a sight, for there were only 50 cars in Moncton at the time. The entourage arrives in Stony Creek. There are 36 people in this photo. Notice the man on the extreme right. A gas lamp appears next to him. A dish towel dries on the line. We shall meet Bessie, who probably hung it there, in a future frame. Some names are known, from left to right. First, E.A. Raleigh, former Moncton mayor. Third, Fred Jones of Jones Lake fame. Seventh, Captain Masters, businessman and future mayor. And to right of the center post and hatless, Sam Winter, prominent Moncton businessman. This was the first house to have natural gas. November 1909, from well number 5 down the road about a kilometer. This well was abandoned in 2008. This luncheon photo could be a follow-up on the auto trip to Stony Creek. The two men on the left are Orrin Boggs and Dr. Henderson. This picture of Dr. Henderson and field manager Orrin Boggs was taken somewhere on the field after 1911. Mr. Boggs must have arrived shortly after Dr. Henderson and seems to have been replaced by W. H. King in 1914. The third man could be Dr. Ells of the Geological Survey in Ottawa. In 1915, Dr. Henderson and new investors acquired Lease 115, forming the New Brunswick Gas and Oilfields Limited with headquarters in Edinburgh, Scotland. Maritime Oilfields assigned gas distribution rights to Moncton Tramways Electricity and Gas Company Limited. The man on the left is Dr. Henderson, on the right Orrin P. Boggs. Tramways directors are Frederick W. Sumner, second from right, H. M. Wood, Thomas Williams, Senator Clifford W. Robinson, and G. R. Jones. By 1920 ownership was acquired by a Pittsburgh company. Oil and gas investment promised generous returns. These well-dressed men are likely all investors, photographed by Dr. Henderson. From the right, number 2 is driller Murray Shaw. Number 3, Orrin Boggs. Number 8, without a hat, John T. Hawk, transcript owner and editor. And number 10, the tall man at the rear, was Clifford Robinson, lawyer, businessman who also served as mayor, premier, and senator. This is the cable tool method. A steam engine turns a sand reel, driving a walking beam with a pitman arm. The other end of the walking beam is connected via the drilling rope or cable to the drill, a heavy tool weighing 3,000 pounds or more. It is dropped into the well, pulverizing the rock. In the beginning, the drill size is up to 20 inches, tapering to 5 inches. Every 3 to 5 feet, the drill is removed, and a baler is dropped into the well to remove the watered, pulverized rock. It could take months to drill a well with this method. The following 12 photos were likely taken between 1910 and 1920. Dates are uncertain and will be omitted. A 72-foot wood-constructed derrick with a base of 20 feet is used to drill, case, and service the well. The tall stack vents an oil or gas-fired boiler, which is supplying steam to power the drilling equipment. A shelter keeps the whole business out of the weather. Murray Shaw, born in Petrolia, Ontario, came to work for the New Brunswick Petroleum Company in 1902 as drilling manager and a blasting expert. He was an experienced oilfield worker when he came to the province, for he retired in 1933, having spent most of 45 years in the business. The drill bit has been pulled from the well and is resting on a wood block. The oil well shooter, Murray Shaw, is pouring nitroglycerin through a torpedo shell funnel into a cylinder. This is lowered into the well with a cable and ignited with a delayed fuse. The flywheel behind, known as a sand reel, is attached to a steam engine with a rope-like belt. The sand reel in turn powers the walking beam and the drill bit. The driller is Mark Odell, a native of Oleans, an oil-rich region in western New York State. He appeared on the scene with Orrin Boggs, retiring in 1940. He is wearing the driller's leather cap that protects the head from oil, which drips off the tooling. A heavy rope is used to feed the drill into the well. Later, a 1-inch steel cable was used. This photo is an extension of the previous one. On the left is Mayor E. Albert Riley, his son Harry, and Orrin Boggs. The key-shaped valve in the bottom of the baler, shown in the center left, opens when depressed at the bottom of the well, allowing slurry to enter. It closes when lifted. The drill with a blunt tip is pulled from the well and hangs suspended. The baler sits off to the right on the floor. Its contents have been dumped into the hole in the floor beside the left foot of the driller. The drill will now be returned to the well. The man on the left is the tool dresser. When the drill bit becomes misshaped, it was hauled outside on a dolly, heated in a forge, and hammered into shape. These tradesmen were well paid, making $8 and $6 per day in the 1930s. As drilling progresses, the drill must be dropped deeper into the well. A threaded rod, known as a temper rod, connects the walking beam to the drill rope. It can be easily lengthened by turning the handle on the rod. This effectively drops the drill deeper into the well, allowing drilling to continue. Eventually, drilling will have to stop to lengthen the drilling rope and shorten the temper rod. The driller's hand is on a wheel which controls the speed of the steam engine. Lying beside the shelter is a pair of tongs that open to grip the casing. These tongs attach to the casing cable. The driller is changing a drill bit with a special wrench. It is manipulated with a jack tracking in the rail embedded in the floor. The large spool, known as a bull wheel, holds rope for drilling. The heavy casing is pulled up the ramp on wheeled dollies. Too bad the names of these men were not recorded. Boilers generated steam to power the drilling equipment and to lower the viscosity of the crude oil. This boiler, used into the 1970s, later generated steam to heat oil in storage tanks, allowing it to flow better. Dr. Henderson is on the left and W.M. Townsend of New York, third from left. Eventually, the downhole pump would have to be replaced. This apparatus would be wheeled up to the well. The sucker rod to which the pump is attached would be lifted in 24-foot lengths and stacked nearby. If unusual wear was observed when changing the pump, the entire production tubing would be raised and the working barrel on the bottom replaced. When a well dried up, an explosive charge would be lowered into the well to reactivate it. This often resulted in an oily mess around the derrick. Nitroglycerin was replaced with liquid TNT and eventually a solid explosive. This picture was taken from Doug Steves' off-road buggy. Well 7 was abandoned in 2009. Solid explosives came in tubular sections and could be stacked one on the other, lowered into the well, and detonated with a timing device. Sometimes a log and sand or gravel would follow to contain the explosion. Blowing a well sometimes attracted a large crowd of onlookers. This well was abandoned in 2007. Mr. Lodge was an honorary member of the famous civic-minded Flatiron Gang of Moncton. In 1901, he was Secretary-Treasurer of the New Brunswick Petroleum Company, and when he died in 1928, he was a Director of the New Brunswick Gas and Oilfields. His acquired knowledge of mining and oil and gas exploration gave him an appreciation of the potential in Stony Creek. Experts may have financed and brought in the wells, but it was Mr. Lodge who was the front man that made it happen. 3 years after Henderson's first 1909 discoveries, Alexander Crichton from Edinburgh, Scotland, arrived in Moncton. He had spent years in India and South Africa. Mr. Crichton came to assist Dr. Henderson, and for 30 years he supervised the detail work in the field and the Moncton office. Standing in front of the derrick is the family of Carey Steeves, an oil field employee. This is a steel derrick owned by the Darcy Exploration Company, contracted to the New Brunswick Gas and Oil Fields. This well was drilled on the riverside of Highway 114 near the top of Scotts Hill. Objects sticking out of the tower are counterweights to support the weight of wrenches used to change the drill. Upon the death of her husband, Bessie operated the company boarding house, taking in lodgers to support her family. In addition to the weekday oilfield workers from Westmoreland County, lodgers William Obens and Thomas Farrell from the USA were also staying in the house. In 1910, the men were working 60 hours a week, earning $350 a year. These pictures are compliments of Harold Toole, Bessie's grandson. Frank worked as a pumper on the oil fields, keeping 3 air-cooled engines working continuously. He would carry an engine to a well, run the pump until the oil stopped flowing, and move the engine to the next well in a circuit. Frank transferred to the Tramways Division, a sister company in Moncton, and was killed in a tragic tramway fire in Moncton, December the 25th, 1919. Many oilfield workers who lived on the east side of the river rowed across the river and stayed at the boarding house in Stony Creek during the week, returning home on the weekend. Frank was one of these, taking a horse from home, which was kept by the Denier family of Dover. This is a streetcar similar to the one that killed Frank Toole. A co-worker, in a rush to save the cars, smashed through a door, critically injuring Frank. Both of Bessie's daughters met their husbands through contact in the boarding house. These late 1920s photos show covered storage tanks. The tanks must have been insulated to keep the oil warm and flowing in cold weather. From left, the girls are Mary, Lillian, and Hattie Steeves. Hattie is Alfred's daughter, who likely took this and the next 2 photos. The girls also appear in the next frame. Frank, a stationary engineer, worked at the oil fields from 1923 to 1945, except for a brief hiatus. He was a man of strong Christian convictions. In the late 1930s, he was working as a tool dresser, making $6 a day. When a 7-day work week was implemented, Frank was fired for refusing to work on Sunday. He turned down a good-paying job in St. John, preferring to stay close to his family and low-paying part-time work. He returned to work briefly, taking his own life at age 38. Frank is standing on tank cars destined for the Imperial Refinery in Dartmouth. This building doubled as a blacksmith shop and a hangout for the men at break time. The horse handler looks like Bill Jonah. The only other man I recognize is Frank Parker, the tall man in the rear. The building to the right houses a boiler to heat oil for the pipeline trip to Weldon. Behind that is the fire station. Osmond Steeves, a son of Bessie, took this photo when the road grader made a stop at the boarding house. The driver, known locally as Scraper Jack, lived in Lower Coverdale. The Russell Motor Patrol No. 3 with a McCormick Deering engine was manufactured between 1926 and 1929. Russell graders made in Minnesota were absorbed by Caterpillar. Some may know it as the gas house. Most passers-by are oblivious to the fact that this house played a significant role in the success of the petroleum industry in Albert County. Bill was working on wells 85 and 86. That storekeeper would have been Watson Steves, who we will see in a later photo. The first of 2 oil field employees killed on the job was Charles Jonah, who died as a result of a bailing accident in 1942. Details in Part 3. William Henry Jonah, no relation, with 26 years' experience, was killed on November the 10th, 1949, handling a roll of cable. In the earlier years, he was a horse handler. Edmund Steves on the left was a World War I veteran and the first refinery operator when it opened in 1931. After leaving the oil field, he ran the Irving Station in Hillsborough, preceding Herb Snyder, and in later years ran the Superline and Fina service stations at the top of Scotts Hill. They are standing in front of the oil field fire station. William Homer King came to New Brunswick in 1914 from Pennsylvania, where drilling for oil began in 1859. I suspect he came with experience with Pennsylvania crude, which had a paraffin content similar to Stony Creek. Mr. King lived in Hillsborough and Moncton and died of a heart failure at age 59, 5 months after retiring. When he died, his body was carried by rail back to Pennsylvania. He filled in his last oil field report on April 2nd, 1932. He likely replaced Orrin Boggs. Field reports were detailed logs of daily events related to gas and oil well drilling and maintenance. This report was initialed W.H.K., Field Superintendent. These field reports can be seen at the Steves House in Hillsborough. Harry Hawks on the left, a long-time oil field employee, went to work at the oil fields in 1921. Harry became field supervisor of drilling operations after Mr. King retired. Camel Bellevue, a Memramcook resident and weekday lodger at the gas house, was employed as a driller. Camel likely worked for the company in Memramcook before Stony Creek came online. The week ending April 9th, 1932 was the first signed by Harry Hawks, field foreman. A heart attack ended Harry's career in February 1963 after 42 years at the New Brunswick Gas and Oil Fields. My guess is that these folks who are dressed well are out for a Sunday afternoon excursion. Perhaps one or all 3 of the men are employees. It appears as though this well is being bailed. The drill is pulled and a mobile winch is parked next to the well with the cable extending into the derrick. This well has been abandoned. This picture taken from well 68 looking toward well 56. Harold described a day as a pumper. He was responsible for pumping 18 wells. 9 wells in a circuit would be pumped each day until oil stopped flowing. Each well had a 1-cylinder, 1.5 horsepower engine run on natural gas. Oil was sold to Marvin's Biscuits and the CNR. When a well was being drilled, it employed 2 drillers and a tool dresser. 12-hour shifts, 2 shifts a day. 20 or more men were employed. Each well had smaller tanks of 250 to 500 barrels. They were connected to this tank with 2-inch feeder lines. By 1940, 126 wells had been drilled, of which 73 were producers. Stephen Steves was a clerk in the gypsum company office when this picture was taken by Harold Toole at the siding in Weldon. Many will remember Stephen as president of the General Motors dealership Steves Motors. This seemed a natural place to take a picture since the Steves house was close by and Harold chummed with the boys. Tank Car 100 was built in 1912. Specs painted on the tank give its capacity as 6,656 imperial gallons. Lightweight, 39,000 pounds. AK 12.32 was painted on the end. AK was the station symbol for the Moncton shops. December 1932 is when NBGO bought the car. Railcar information supplied by Conrad Steves. Ivar from Norway jumped a whaling ship at Cape Tormentine in 1904, worked on farms in Melrose and Chimagui and the railway before employment on the oil fields in 1911. Becoming oil production manager in 1931, he married Myrtle, the second of Bessie's daughters. A heart attack in September 1958 ended his 47-year career. An identical boiler with wheels appears beside well 98 in a later photo. Born October the 9th, 1912, life was tough for Harold, for at the tender age of 7 he lost his father. Harold stands in front of his 1927 Buick. Harold remembers Charlie on the left as bailing wells, Harry as a field supervisor, and Jadis as a driller. Over a year, Jadis picked up, straightened, and saved 7 barrels of nails that had fallen to the ground, only to have the whole lot stolen from his barn at home. Alfred was an experienced oil field worker. The work was hazardous enough, but Alfred was seriously injured when a large dog ran out in front of him when traveling to work from Dawson Settlement on his motorcycle. We can thank him for recording history, for several early photos in this collection were taken by Alfred. His pictures were passed on to his daughter Hattie and to her daughter Phyllis. This well was in sight of the warehouse. It also appears in another photo in Part 2. Well 20 was abandoned in 2008. Ivor, Alfred, and Claude are making a winter patrol, inspecting the facilities to head off any potential problems. Well 20 is taking a winter siesta. Oil wells would be shut down in winter. Oil would not flow. Crews would be laid off. The engine, which has been removed for winter overhaul, is geared down and connected by a pitman arm to the walking beam, which in turn drives the downhole pump. This is another idle well, waiting for the warmth of spring to surrender its black gold. A tripod is used to service a well after the derrick is removed. These 2 men are operating a mobile winch attached to the wellhead. When you look at the clutter around the well, it looks like a lifetime endeavor to build a derrick and supporting structures. This is a Harry Hawks photo. Well 97 is abandoned. A large inventory of various pipe sizes and timber to build the derricks and shelters occupied the yard. Watt Steeves was the storekeeper. Charlie Wilson, the truck driver, lived in the little house in the background. Henry began work as a driller in 1937, finishing his career when drilling stopped in the late 1960s. Harold sold his 1927 Buick to Watt Steeves for $35, having earlier paid $125 at Lounsbury's. Here it is being used to plow snow. This same car appeared in an earlier 1934 photo with Harold. Watson went to work on the oil fields after discharge from the Army in 1918, retiring when drilling ceased. Gerald worked there during his high school summers and briefly after discharge from the Army in 1946. Alfred and Les Founds are either splicing a rope or tying an eye to contain a thimble. Les, a tool dresser, worked at the oil fields from 1935 until 1951. He is about 47 years of age in this photo. Alfred worked as a driller in a fruitless search for oil in Connecticut, Nova Scotia in 1950 and 1951, returning to work in Stony Creek for about 5 more years. This is a newly drilled well being outfitted for pumping oil. The drilling apparatus has been removed and is being replaced with pumping equipment. A natural gas line fuels the single-cylinder engine on the left. Alfred Steeves is operating a lever which controls the baler. A walking beam, lighter than the one used for drilling, is mounted on the Sampson post and driven by a pitman arm connected to the motor-driven reduction gear. This results in vertical motion of the pump. The wooden barrel on the left, loaded with rocks, acts as a counterweight. Again, the man on the left is Alfred Steeves. George McFarland worked at the oil fields from 1920 until 1935 as a rig builder. His son Arnold, in this photo, carried on the same occupation, leaving to work for CN from 1943 until 1945, returning until the early 1950s. Arnold and his wife were living in the boarding house when their daughter Margaret was born in 1938. Every effort was made in the production of this video to feature the men and women who contributed to the success of the burgeoning oil and natural gas industry in Canada. The next video features Micmac gasoline and the production of natural gas.